Yeah, so normally my day job is just geospatial specialist, but I was seconded to the Representation Commission. This talk's just going to be about that, a bit of history, background, the process, how electoral boundaries are reviewed, overview of what boundaries change, very high level overview, and then at the end, I may regret this, but I'm going to try a live QGIS demo to show you how you redistrict, and we'll see how we go. So just to start with some current affairs and history, you may have seen in the news there's lots of talk about redistricting in the US at the moment. The main issue with this is that current politicians are involved in deciding the boundaries. So you get blatant gerrymandering and a whole lot of political sort of noise. And I found this quote by John Sheehan, which says, "The most unsatisfactory, most ill-considered and most unfair attempt to settle the representation of the people." And you may think that applies to the current situation in the US, and I probably wouldn't disagree with you, but in fact, John Sheehan was a New Zealand Member of Parliament in the 1870s, and they had a similar problem back there when current MPs were involved in deciding electoral boundaries with not a very good result because of it. But to their credit, it took them a little while, but to their credit, they set up the Representation Commission in 1887, and its job is just to decide electoral boundaries. And this creation of an independent commission is recognised as a significant landmark in New Zealand's electoral history, and actually became a model for Australia and the UK as well. So LINZ is involved because the Surveyor General, that's a statutory role and is always on the commission, and I was the LINZ technical advisor, basically providing mapping and analysis support to the commission. So I reported to the Surveyor General, but really I was working for the commission as a whole. So the Electoral Act 1993 has a principle of equality of representation. So similar populations for each electorate, votes count equally, avoid gerrymandering. If you don't know what gerrymandering is, give it a search, because it's got quite a funny story how the name came to be, involving someone called Jerry and a salamander. So, but basically it's when a political party defines electoral boundaries to favour themselves. And there's this quite a strict 5%, plus or minus 5% of a quota, so that's about 3,500 people for each electorate. You've got to be within that tolerance. And just on top of all that, New Zealand's got MMP, which is a proportional representation system, so pretty balanced setup really. So how is a review triggered? Well, it comes after a census, which happens every 5 years, but interestingly, the government just announced that they're no longer doing the normal census. I think it's probably just going to be like an administrative census, but it's a bit of a asterisk there to see how that's going to work in future. So the government statistician, he, as well as publishing the population numbers, importantly for us, or for this process, he publishes the number of electorates in the North Island, South Island and Maori electorates, and the quota that they have to adhere to. So how are those calculations made, I hear you ask? This is a slide, if you like, legislation and simple maths. Number of South Island electorates is fixed at 16, so that's in the Act, it's always 16. So to get the quota, it's simple, you just divide the population by 16 and there's your quota, 70,000. The North Island varies in the number of electorates. So to get the number, you divide the North Island population by the South Island's quota, gives you 48 this time, And then to get the North Island quota more accurately, because it's not going to be quite the same as the South Islands, you just divide the population by that 48. And similar story with Maori electorates. So that's the numbers that basically are plugged into QGIS when we do our redistricting, and it tells us if we're within quota or not. We have some criteria in the Act that we have to adhere to, as I mentioned, plus or minus 5% of quota. Use existing boundaries where possible. So often it's not possible, but it's good if you can, because it gives consistency and people know which electorate they're in. Maintain communities of interest, facilities of communications, which are mainly roads. Topo features, very important, like the Southern Alps makes a really good boundary, or rivers especially, so people know which side of a river they're on. They may not know which street a boundary runs down quite as much without checking the map. And also we take into account projected variations in electoral population, so those are provided by Stats New Zealand for us. So if a electorate, for example, is projected to increase in population, we might set it a little bit below quota to take, so next time it doesn't have to change. The process is a maximum of 6 months from when the Surveyor General presents a provisional boundaries report to the Commission. So producing this report is when really started using QGIS in anger. So basically we do a map of every single electorate and publish the population for that and how far out of tolerance, well, how much within the plus or minus 5% it is, and highlight the change areas from its current position. And when the Commission is presented with that provisional boundary report, it then uses that as a starting point for their discussions to come up with proposed boundaries that go up for public consultation. And yeah, it was kind of cool but also terrifying to see my maps on the homepage of a news website, because I'm not a cartographer, but at least my mum knows what I do for a job now. So once that's published, there's a chance for public objections, and then people can object to the objections. So it's just like trying to get a balance of what's going on. I think there were about 600 in total, and a lot of them were grouped around particular areas where there are the more controversial changes. And the Commission, I have to say, the Commission does take them into account and does make changes where they can, but obviously they can't always please everyone. And public hearings, so people came along, had QGIS up on the screen, and people would come along and tell them why the boundary shouldn't be where we put it. And then at the start of August, the final report was published and presented to the Governor-General. So that's the process. So what was the outcome? Well, the Maori electorates were very simple. There was only one electorate, Electoral Rafti, that was slightly below tolerance. And with these below tolerance, it doesn't mean people have necessarily left. It just means that perhaps the population has stayed the same, but the rest of the country has increased in population. And there was just a minor tweak we could do down in Wellington to make that within tolerance, so that was fairly straightforward. South Island only had 2 electorates that were out of tolerance. Invercargill in the south was a little change in here, and then Selwyn was one of the biggest growing areas in the country. There's been massive development there, and that required a more complicated change, and with the demo gods smiling on me, I'll try and show you how we did that at the end of this presentation. So the North Island historical trend is to add an electorate. It's just because generally North Island grows faster than the South Island. But I think this is the first time in history that the South Island grew faster than the North Island population, and so we had to take an electorate away, which is a totally new problem to grapple with. So where should we lose an electorate from? 17 electorates below, but only 7 above the threshold, the plus or minus 5% threshold. Initially, our thought was to take it out of Wellington, Auckland Central area, because that's sort of traditionally where we've always added an electorate in. And there's this big clump of electorates there that are all below tolerance. So I thought, well, that's got to be the easiest, doesn't it? Well, no. The issue here is that you get the more rural or suburban areas to the north and south that are rapidly growing. So actually it makes more sense to expand those central electorates out, and then they balance themselves out. So the place where it became obvious where an electorate should be taken away from was the lower North Island. So there's 12 electorates. They're all below quota, and they only have enough population for 11.4, and they're all projected to decline. And the Commission decided in the end to remove these 3 electorates, Otaki, Mana and Hario, and replace them with 2 new ones called Kapiti and Kiniperu. And if I just go back, you can see that northern boundary with Rangitiki up here, how far it comes down. And this is the issue when you make such a big change. It has big knock-on effects. So we basically had to change boundaries all the way up for at least to the central North Island, just to cope with that excess of population that removing an electorate caused. As far north as Taranaki King Country. So QGIS app, that was developed by Noel at North Road. Noel's in the room over there, everyone knows him. Worked really well, really smoothly. As we were just saying before, if it crashes now, I won't care because it didn't crash at all during the whole retcon process. It was originally developed in 2020, reused it this time, and we had a few enhancements that were identified by the team last time. It's got a simplified mode, so we actually give all the commissioners a laptop with QGIS installed, so they can go away and play around and investigate possible scenarios. So the simplified UI mode really helps non-technical people use QGIS. There was some issue with the libraries that switch between different scenarios, and Niall said there's a new one using coverages or something that it increased the performance from about a minute to about 10 seconds. So it was a really good thing when you're showing people, oh, this is what this scenario looks like, and then switch over to this scenario. You don't want to be sitting around for a minute waiting for that switch. And function to calculate population of change areas. This was a big one for me. These like 3% move from Epsom to Albert and the 9% up here. Those are all published in the maps, and we have to calculate those. So previously they had to be done by a very manual, horrible process that was fraught, but QGIS plugin just does all that now. It's open source, so if anyone has a country that is in need of a redistricting app, it's there. Right, I'll try and do a demo now. If I can bring up QGIS. So here's QGIS. So first thing we do is go into that simplified mode that I was just talking about. And it just gets rid of all the toolbars except for a couple which we use for redistricting. And then just go in here, turn on redistricting. There's another toolbar that comes up. So we want to do the South Island example here. It's usually faster than this. Oh, that's what everyone says, isn't it? I think the internet's a little slow. So because, oh there we are, the South Islands. Because the North Island, South Island and Maori electorates all have slightly different quotas, they're regarded as separate tasks in the app. So if we go in and show you Selwyn, you can see it says plus 14 odd percent, so that's way out of quota, so we need to deal with that. To do that, it's basically as simple as moving a boundary. All the numbers there, so I should have mentioned this previously, we get a mesh blocks layer from Stats New Zealand, and it's just a polygon layer, and each polygon has a population in it. These are rounded populations for privacy reasons. And when I'll show you, there's an API, Stats API, that we use to get the precise electoral numbers, which was really cool and worked very well. So I'll just turn on that layer. So how to redistrict. Make sure mesh blocks are highlighted. All we're going to do is say to the app, put these mesh blocks in this electorate. So toggle on editing, just use the normal select by polygon tool. I'll just do this roughly. So we're wanting to put these mesh blocks that are currently in Selwyn into Wigram, which is the neighbouring electorate. So we just simply select them like this. And because we're going into Wigram, we can cut the corner here. So it highlights all those. And brings up things, where do we want to redistrict those mesh blocks to? We go select from that, just click in Wigram. Are you sure? Yes. And voila. And then you can see it updates Selwyn. Now it's minus 2.2. I know it's projected to increase, so that's quite a good number for it to be at. But then you can see Wigram is now, what is it, plus 17 or something. So I won't bother boring you with the whole exhaustive process, but what we did then was to move part of Wigram into Christchurch Central, and then part of Christchurch Central into Christchurch East. So you can see it's a process of knock-on effects. Now the population has an asterisk beside it. That's because these are calculated using the rounded mesh block populations. And if I click on this update scenario statistics, it'll send all the mesh blocks to the Stats New Zealand server with what electorate they're in and return the exact population counts. I can't do it now because they've turned it off because there's no need for it anymore, and just saving a bit of money on AWS. But also it returns the predicted variations in 2026 and 2029. And prior to 2020, what they had to do was basically email a CSV file or the like to Stats, and then they would have to ingest that into their system, and it would be kind of an overnight process. And prior to that, it was a totally manual process using paper and big maps. So yeah, just be able to click the button and get immediate confirmation is really good. I think that's all I've got for you. I think I'm coming up to time, so where are we? Oh yeah, just the data that we use, mesh blocks, electoral boundaries, obviously. A whole selection of different base maps depending on what is useful at the time in the stats New Zealand API. Yeah, so that's it. Is there any questions?
Thank you, Ian. Let's take some question on the floor. We've got one over here.
So I see you redistricting using the mesh blocks to assign, sort of populations. Do you also then customize it and follow topography, and snap to different layers, those context layers?
Yeah, so that's a Stats New Zealand maintenance task, and yeah, that can be quite challenging for them. So we used a frozen mesh block pattern, but the commissioners, when they're setting a boundary, they may see, oh, that could be improved, and so they would request what they call a nudge or a split to the mesh block pattern. Yeah, so it's an ongoing process.
Kind of as a follow-up to that, was there any allowance for using kind of automated methods for distributing the population differences, or did it kind of have to be a manual process of moving populations? Because as you're saying with the knock-on effects, would you have been allowed to let it sort itself out?
I think if we had an automated process to create the first provisional report, we would definitely have used it and then sort of checked it to see if it, and then obviously made changes as we saw fit. But there wasn't anything that we were aware of, but that's not to say that there isn't something there that could have done the job. We just, I guess we weren't quite ready to go in that direction at the moment.
Any other question?
Xavier did one in the States. I'm not sure if you were aware of that. I'm sure it was done by then, and but I'm not sure if it's applicable to your situation. So that's my one question. Had you ever heard of that or other open source ones? Xavier doesn't exist anymore, but I think the tool maybe does. They were bought by.
What is it called?
Xavier.
Xavier, no, I haven't heard of it.
Robert Cheetham is here. He's the ex-Xavier head. Element 84 bought a Xavier. But they did an automated redistricting tool. And other question is, it looks like the plugin's very dedicated to the New Zealand case. Yes. With your mesh blocks and your specific requirements and way of doing things.
Yeah, definitely is. I don't know, Niall might be able to comment of how easy it would be to change it.
Well, when we designed the plugin, we wanted it to be something that other people could pick up and use in different scenarios. So it was written and designed with. So it was written and designed that the New Zealand specific logic sits outside of it. So there's a sort of generic base for redistricting that's all interfaces and sort of abstracted away, and then the New Zealand bit sits on top. That's still open source, you can still get that in the repository, but the intention was that potentially if somebody else wanted to use it, they'd replace that top business level logic with their own legislation, rules and such, but they'd still get all the tools and the facilities in that sit at the low level.
Okay, one more.
Thanks, that was really interesting. I actually changed which electorate I was in and didn't wonder why. But my question is, like you said in the 70s, I think there was lots of criticism about gerrymandering and stuff. And now you can only change the boundaries so much. You want to keep them consistent. do you think there would be a fairer way if you could start from scratch?
I think, I don't really know, but I think it would be worth investigating increasing the tolerance to plus or minus 10%. That, in theory, is less fair, but it would make, or maybe this is because I've got a geography background, it would mean the boundaries could more often follow natural features. The other thing I was thinking about, it would be kind of cool if they increased the number of South Island electorates by 1, so up to 17. Just because that would then reduce the population of each electorate and make it easier to fit them all in. Because when you've got a big population, you know, West Coast Tasman, it's a massive area and it has to have a big population in it, and you have to then start putting Haast and sort of Golden Bay in the same electorate, which is less than ideal.
Okay, let's thank Ian here. Thank you.